Okay, hello. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming to our session. This is a session about some rapid-fire use cases of Snowpark. There's clearly been a lot of Snowpark announcements and activity going on, both this conference and the previous conference and in the year in between. So we're here really to just shed a little bit of light on how Snowpark is being used by some of us in real-life scenarios, out in the wild with customers and in deployments. Before we dive into specific use cases, just a quick recap for anybody that doesn't yet know. Snowpark effectively is the programmability layer for Snowflake. So anything that is using Python, Java, Scala, or now with the latest announcements on containers, pretty much any language you like. But Snowpark is what enables you to use those languages to interact with Snowflake from both inside and outside. So diving into that, very quickly to introduce myself. My name is Chris Hasty. I'm a data practice lead at Interworks. We are one of Snowflake's global services partners, and my primary role is to effectively enable customers to unlock and achieve their data using Snowflake. So to kick us off, Stuart, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about some of the use cases you have for Snowpark?
Sure. Hey, I'm Stuart Bryson. I'm an independent, my company's called Numinal. I'm an independent data product strategist. So if you're thinking about building a data product, you want to know how you might be able to do that, then that's exactly what I do. So some use, why you might want to use Snowpark. So if you think about sort of in the early days of Snowflake, it was mostly SQL developers, right? If you wanted to get something over the finish line in Snowflake, there was a lot of SQL understanding and development. But now, since Snowpark has been announced, we're seeing developers from all kinds of languages, okay? And those developers are building amazing things. You're doing it in Python or Scala or Java or even JavaScript. And so now a developer can sort of develop in the toolkit or the polyglot language that they're most familiar with. Now, as we look to see that organizations are now moving to more distributed data locations within their organizations, right? Whether you call this data mesh or not, we're starting to see less centralized ownership of data, and there's more of a distributed nature now, okay? So when you start looking at what can Snowpark do for you, if you think about now developers can use Snowpark to build end-to-end data pipelines. It's a data frame-based language. So you can use it as your tool to build and share data within a particular domain. But you can also develop UDFs or procedures in any language you want and also share those across domains. So now you're sharing your data. You're also sharing your data transformation language or your transformations, right? And so when you look at it, this helps your entire data platform that might be built distributedly, if that's a word, actually mesh, pun intended. So if you look at, now you can have a sort of a complete ownership, even though it was built sort of from the ground up in across a lot of different domains. And if you think about it, no matter what language you build a UDF in, it looks the same. So it doesn't matter if one domain is using Scala, one domain is using Python. They're publishing these UDFs, these pipelines, and they're usable across the domain no matter what language you're sort of into.
Perfect. Thank you, Stuart. So, Piers, moving on to you. Do you want to tell us a bit more about yourself and how business users can make use of Snowpark? I mean, is it just for data engineers and developers?
Thanks, Chris. So I'm Piers Batchelor, Senior Product Manager at Strato Analytics, and it's my role to make sure that data is easy to work with, easy to use, fun to use as well. And in terms of, is it for business users, is it for data engineers, Snowpark's for everybody who wants to make use of it. Yes, a data engineer can build something using Snowpark, something that's very powerful, but a bit like a Python workbook. Usually in a Python workbook, you use it once or twice, and then it might be a throwaway. When you're using Snowpark, that could be a user-defined function, and you save that, you reuse it. You can distribute that, and you can offer that to business users via data apps. So, for example, that's what I do at Strata Analytics. I build data apps, and my colleague Elizabeth is over there as well. She's building data apps with me too. We give them to business users, and that could be building a forecast or building something with NLP where they can interact with and have a real data-driven experience, drive decision-making, and just do their job very well, all powered by data. And they don't have to have their data leave Snowflake to be able to do that. And that's why it's really powerful for business users, and it should be democratized for everybody. And another way you can do that as well is, so we're no code. If you want to code your solution, you can try it out, you can test it out in Streamlit as well. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Biz. So, yeah, it's convenient that you've brought up native data apps. Obviously, we've heard a lot about native data apps today and all of the announcements from the keynote this morning. Chris, do you want to tell us a little bit more, introduce yourself and tell us how those can be used?
Oh yeah, go on then. So yeah, I'm Christopher for the purposes of this session. I'm one of these data hogging data engineers that we've been talking about, and a Snowflake solutions architect at Aimpoint Digital. And native apps have been very exciting for me, I think, and I think they make Snowpark very exciting, or more exciting. And the two objects that come to mind is, so in a native application, you are sharing not just data itself. You don't need to share data. You can share objects. And as Piers mentioned, Streamlit, that's a very exciting thing. It makes sense for your Streamlit apps to be pretty Snowpark based, because you'll be developing your Streamlit apps in Python. So, why flit between languages when you don't have to? And why, lose that programmability of Python? It works quite seamlessly together. So, for example, you may, in your Streamlit app, have a filter. Wrap the filter into a variable, wrap that variable into your Snowpark code. That's pretty seamless. That works wonderfully. And the second thing is a store procedure. There's lots of, store procedures, actually, I'm going to generalize that a bit more. There's store procedures, UDFs, you can share all of this. There's lots of things that Snowflake does natively. There's lots of things it doesn't do, especially when you're talking about very sort of industry-specific things. So you can develop some pretty sort of industry-specific logic in Snowpark and throw it out in a data app and let that, sort of spread across the world.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening on that. So, beyond UDFs, store procedures, native apps, and all that, something else that you can use, external functions. Piers, do you want to tell us a bit more about external functions and how you've used some of those in the actions inside your tool?
Of course, yeah. I wrote on Medium recently, it's on Snowflake's Medium, about an external function that connects ChatGPT, Snowflake, and Slack. So there's an example on there, do check it out. And I'll quickly talk you through it. So what I did, Chris, was I took data from a particular table, and from there, in my external function, I shared that data to a Google Cloud external function, and that connected to OpenAI, so ChatGPT, and we produced an insight from that. So I'm able to send that insight to Slack to all of my business users, and yes, that's using Snowpark, and they're getting the benefits of Snowpark. They don't have to interact with it themselves. It could be a button in a Strata or Streamlit, whatever you want to use. But it means that they're getting value out of the data all through Snowpark. And it's incredibly easy to do. There's a tutorial as well.
Perfect. So I've actually got an external functions use case as well. One that I've found has been particularly useful for a few of my customers. It's not a particularly complex one, but it's been one that's just made things a little bit easier for them. is whenever a customer has wanted to set up key pair authentication for Snowflake for some of their users, and they have several cases where users, they might know their particular third-party tool really well, they might know how to use it really well, they might know how to set up and configure with Snowflake really well, but that doesn't mean they necessarily understand authentication and how to generate key pairs and all that sort of thing. So all we've done in a very simple Lambda function, a simple Azure function, is we've got maybe 5 or 6 lines of code that can generate a Snowflake-friendly key pair. And this particular function is built so that it can directly interact with an Azure key vault or an AWS key vault at the same time. So when that key is generated, if it's for a particular service account that's going to be deployed through Azure or is leveraging that key vault, then this function can directly both apply the public key to that user in Snowflake itself, and at the same time, it can store the private key securely in the key vault, where it can then be retrieved by the application that's going to use it. So having this as an external function means an admin for Snowflake can simply go through the normal steps they would process to create a user and configure who can access, what roles will apply to that user, what the access to those roles are, etc. And then all they need to do at the end, execute this external function, and that can figure out that last bit of authentication to make sure that user is ready to go for the particular platform. But everything I've just talked about there is very much using Snowflake to particularly trigger some activity in the external function. So that's typically how external functions work. You use Snowflake, you execute the code that orchestrates or triggers it, and then it runs in Azure or AWS or whatever. That doesn't always have to be the way, and sometimes you may want to use Snowpark to interact the other way and get external technology to interact with Snowflake. And Chris, do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, and I think your example is a really good one of how exciting it is to use things with other things. That always gets the blood pumping of the assorted geeks that we are. And you're quite right, you can do the inverse as well. Snowpark's very good for doing that. And I have a client who, in the audience, so I'm not going to publicly break an NDA, so I'll be very vague here. But they wanted some refunds to happen, and as part of that refund, they needed a lot of information from their Snowflake instance. And so it was very useful to be able to use Snowpark. We had a store procedure, and that store procedure was established, set up in Snowflake itself. And the application for processing refunds was just able to essentially go, Snowpark, trigger, and there we had a data frame return that we could then do .collect and process that and start working on that sort of more application logic, which was being hosted in Lambda functions.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm glad that you talked about that, even though I did bring it up. Because again, I've got another use case that uses a similar approach. One thing we've seen a lot of the time is the typical kind of data ingestion challenge, trying to get data into Snowflake that's not always already neatly prepared in a tightly packaged Parquet or CSV or what have you. One really nice use of Snowpark that I've found that actually doesn't take very long to set up either is getting some form of a platform to run the car. I mean, these days, actually, you could probably use a native app. You could use a container. You could use it directly in Snowflake, which is fantastic. My particular deployment before then, that was running in an Azure function, but it was running a very simple, small piece of code, and it was just helping us ingest Excel files from a wide number of different providers that all were given a template. This was a customer whose job it is to gather in data from 100 of their clients every couple of days, always these Excel files. It's a fixed template, and they're kind of at the point where it'd be a little bit too much effort to go and change that template and switch it into something that's more easily ingestible for all of their customers, and their customers like submitting it in the Excel. So all we had to do was use Snowpark. to unlock that Excel file. And in a very, very short amount of code, we can use something like pandas, read that Excel file into a data frame. We were quite lucky in the instance that these Excel files were all quite small, but if they were bigger, then you can always use batches, and pandas can support that as well. And we could use that to simply read the data directly into a data frame and then use Snowpark to drop the data directly into a staging table. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but that little thing only took about a week to put together, and that week includes all of the hosting that we had to figure out and working with IT ops to get all the relevant Azure roles, etc., which is basically all the work that you can now skip if you're just going to go directly to doing it in a native app or something similar. But the actual code itself is very small, very easy to deploy, and it's unlocked this whole easy ingestion process that before that, the customer had to really navigate around. And yes, there are third-party tools that could help you with the whole conversion of Excel, and those third-party tools are also fantastic for what they do and how they do it. But sometimes when you've got a very simple use case, you just want a very simple solution that you can run for a very low cost, and that was it. And it worked really nicely. So I think that's pretty much everything that we had planned for this session. Those are just a few of the rapid-fire use cases that we have. I wanted to open the floor up for if anybody does have any questions.
If there's not a floating mic, then I want, user full capacity. Oh, yeah, there we go.
So if you just want to raise your hand if you have got a question.
Hi, thanks for your time. Have you ever used Snowpark for a use case of, like you just said, converting it to Excel, but do it with a push via email to a consumer that might need it on a frequent basis?
I'm actually really glad you asked that. That almost sounds like it wasn't a plan. That sounds like one because I've got a perfect use case for that. So thank you. Yes, that situation I just talked about, that was the first part of a longer meta-driven ingestion process. So we actually used Snowpark not just to take the Excel file and convert it to CSV, but then we could spit out the metadata from the pandas data frame, ingest that into Snowflake, use that metadata to generate tables, add missing rows, all this stuff. And from that, we then had a follow-up process to apply various testing. Right at the end of that was this really neat and tidy little part that was, again, through Snowpark that tracked every activity that happened. And because it's all using Snowpark, we could wrap pretty much every clause in try-catch statements or similar logging and error handling. If anything fails along the way, then it's very easy for us to directly ping that back to the submitting user as an email, not just with there's a failure that's happened, but we can tell them the exact error that occurred. We can tell them what the file was. We've got a whole node of additional logging that's built into it. And if nothing goes wrong and the file does get ingested all the way, past all the testing, then we can still send an email at the end of that as well to say, thank you for your submission. It's been processed successfully and your next file is due whenever. Are there any other questions? Any other hands raised?
Go on, be brave.
We don't want to waste the 1 minute and 16 seconds we have left. This real estate is really hard to get. So thank you, brave sir.
I'm sorry. Do you recommend using Snowpark to build like intensive data pipelines that moves like a big amount of data? I mean, beyond the terabyte.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, we all know when you can chunk up those virtual warehouses to make them really powerful, make them really churn, make them sexy. And so, especially because Snowpark unlocks that programmability, that it can be done in SQL, but you'd have to be completely mad to want to. And so it doesn't just mean you have significantly greater flexibility of transformation, but you also get to chunk that up with those big, sexy warehouses. So yes.
And I'll add to that just that a lot of the things that a lot of the approaches you take in data frame development, it makes more sense than it does in SQL. It just does. And so that declarative approach of starting with a data frame and slowly applying logic, slicing it, aggregating it, filtering it, windowing it, and all those sorts of things makes so much sense. You can write a pipeline end to end in a very few amount, very little code. So I think it's the perfect use case. I think supporting the workloads that used to run in Spark now in Snowpark with that same sort of look and feel is exactly where it should be used.
Perfect. Okay. Well, perfect. Another question. If our mics get cut off, I assume we're over our 20 minutes. But
we're going to keep going until they cut them.
Thank you, guys. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So currently we use JavaScript wrappers with SQL for all our ETL jobs. Can Snowpark convert JavaScript wrappers into Python, or do we have to do that manually?
Snowflake gets very upset when people talk about Snowpark as just a sort of SQL conversion thing. Essentially, it does that, yes. But
SQL conversion. No.
You're very quiet. Sorry.
JavaScript.
Yes, you can develop in JavaScript in Snowpark, but also if you just to say the UDFs are written in JavaScript that you're using, that just runs in JavaScript.
My question is, right now all our ETL use JavaScript wrappers with SQL. We want to go to Python. Is there a way to convert JavaScript wrappers into Python using Snowpark? Or do we have to do that manually?
So I would say to that, I believe if you were to just use something like an LLM model, it could very easily convert a lot of your JavaScript to Python if you need to. So
does SnowConvert do it? Do you know?
Sorry?
Does SnowConvert do that? Do you know?
SnowConvert might do that. There probably will be an app. If there isn't one now, there will be. But I would suggest feeding it to something like that. You can use Snowpark to feed it. You can crawl through all of your definitions for all of your sprocs and UDFs, etc. Get all those out into some form of separate database, feed it into an LLM. It can tell you all the conversions, and then you could probably automatically apply them again and redeploy all of your definitions.
Be careful of hallucinations when using LLMs. You can use LLMs to convert code. Actually, Snowpark related, although I didn't use Snowpark to build it, I did build a Snowpark code generator using OpenAI and Streamlit.
I will make one point, though, and this is the beauty of polyglot support, and that is that there's no real good reason to convert a bunch of working code from one language to another when it's exposed in the platform like Snowflake, where it does the same thing. So my approach would be, as you need to touch that code, convert it. Because this is the beauty of a platform where it doesn't matter what you wrote it in. The function looks the same, it acts the same, it does the same bit of work. So this is why it's so exciting that you could migrate this code over time as you touch it.
I'm nodding vigorously in agreement.
You're not
nodding vigorously.
Oh, okay, good.
Vigorously in agreement.
Peripheral vision.
Thank you for that. So our challenge was we have thousands of jobs. I mean, thousands. And when we started 2 years ago, Snowflake
if you hold the mic a bit like this, it's just a bit...
A little bit closer to your mouth.
You'll be picked up. Hold it diagonally, like this.
Like this. Okay.
Tilt.
Better
Perfect.
Much better, thank you.
Yes.
Okay. So we have thousands of jobs right now.
Yep.
And when we started 2 years ago, Snowflake did not support Python. So we had to go with JavaScript. But just the thought of using JavaScript for ETL was new to us. We never heard of it before. And that's why we're asking if there's a way to automatically. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for the question.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm pretty sure our 20 minutes was up by several minutes, but if anyone does want to talk further, we're all data superheroes. We can normally be found over in the Superhero community booth over there, or just grab us after the session if you wish. And thank you very much for listening. Have a great day.
Yeah, thanks
Thanks, everyone.